welcome to this episode of VETchat. Before we get started with today's guest, it's important to note that the topic of today's podcast is pregnancy and baby loss, which can be a very sensitive and difficult subject for some people. So if you feel that you are not in a good place to listen to this conversation, we would encourage you to take care of yourself and to skip this episode. So today we are joined by Nat Scroggie, a small animal vet and passionate advocate for wellbeing in the veterinary profession. Nat is the co-founder of Vet Minds, a group dedicated to providing support, friendship and understanding to veterinary professionals who've experienced pregnancy and baby loss. Through her own personal experience and her work with Vet Minds, Nat has become an important voice in breaking down the silence around baby loss and promoting positive change in the veterinary profession. So welcome, Nat. Thank you for being here today to share your experiences with me.
Thank you so much for having me on and for helping to start that conversation in the veterinary profession. It's such an important thing. So yeah, thank you to you guys.
Problem. So should we start? Do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey trying to have a baby?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one element of my story that I've not spoken about a huge amount before is that actually, so my pregnancy loss was from an unplanned pregnancy. So I was in a stable relationship. We were financially stable. We both knew that we wanted to have children, but our pregnancy was a shock. It was unplanned. So it was something that we talked about a lot, and we drawing up lots of tables of pros and cons. And it was a very considered decision to go ahead with it. We even went to a family planning clinic to talk it through. And I think, yeah, that's sort of one element that I guess hasn't often come up before. And I was pretty young. I think I was 28. I was very fit. I was training for London Marathon. And the pregnancy happened, I guess, by mistake. So whilst I was aware of the figure of 1 in 4 pregnancies ending in loss, it didn't cross my mind that figure particularly occurred to me, because I just felt like I was young, I was fit, and it had happened against the odds anyway. So yeah, I think we hear these statistics, but we often feel like it's not going to happen to us, and then it did. And it was an early pregnancy loss around about 9 weeks, and it affected me more than I could possibly have imagined. I think with it being an unplanned pregnancy in the first place, and a pregnancy that we thought really carefully about whether we wanted to progress with, I think prior to being pregnant or going through something like that, I might have thought that I would, I don't know, be quite accepting of that. And maybe with our vet backgrounds, we sort of feel like we know the circle of life and we know these things happen. But yeah, it hit me like an absolute ton of bricks. And I think that's something that maybe I felt guilty about, how much it affected me almost, because I think you sort of feel, because people know that early pregnancy is a risky stage, that maybe you shouldn't get carried away. And so if it really hits you that maybe you, I don't know, you got carried away or something like that. But the reality is, when you make the choice to try for a baby, or you're pregnant and you decide to continue with that pregnancy, it's an absolutely enormous decision that you have to think through really carefully. And when you do that, you commit to every stage of that pregnancy, from the changes in your body to going through childbirth to having a baby to having that child as an adult. And so when you lose that, whatever stage in the fertility journey you're on, you can't help but grieve every single stage of that, no matter how early that loss is, or whether it's infertility rather than loss. So yeah, so it was awful, and it was unexpected. It wasn't handled very well when I returned back to work. And sort of without being asked, my boss had told colleagues in the practice that I'd had my appendix out. So when I went back into work, people obviously had no idea. So it felt like every time I walked around a corner, there'd be someone else going, "Oh, hi, Nat, are you feeling better?" And of course I wasn't, because it wasn't that kind of thing. So I found that really, really difficult. And
had you told many people early on in your pregnancy when you found out you were pregnant, or had you kept it quite a small group of people?
We'd kept it in quite a small group of people. I guess partly because it wasn't planned, but also there's that 12-week thing, which now I feel really differently about. We hadn't told our families. So the first sort of mention of that was having to ring them up and tell them that we'd lost a baby that they didn't even know existed. And for us, it was so I was actually training for the London Marathon when this happened, and my loss was, I think it was a couple of days before. And because I was so I took a lot of advice from some sports medicine consultants, because I was very fit and I was already a long way through my training. The advice I was given was that I was probably okay to run it, but massively slowly. So I was planning on going ahead because I was very fit, but sort of doing it maybe 7 hours or something. But I'd been publicly fundraising for the guide dogs, and I'd raised over £2,000. So when I obviously couldn't run the London Marathon, and so I had to tell people why. So that added this element that was really challenging. So the pregnancy, I guess, was wrapped up in that kind of anxiety, and I hadn't told people that because I thought that people around me would be very worried about me running, and I didn't want to give them that anxiety. So we'd planned to tell people after I'd completed it, and obviously we didn't get that chance. So that was
that must have been such an awful experience and thing to have to go through.
It was really frightening.
You said you touched upon the fact that you feel differently now about the 12-week thing.
Yeah, I do. It's I guess I should preface that by saying I think that it's whatever's right for an individual person. I think from my own experiences now, I would be inclined, anyone that I would want, that I feel would be there to support me if we had a loss, I would probably tell straight away so that you've got that support network there, and so that people can support you with any anxieties that you have in an early pregnancy. But it is a bit of a thing, isn't it, the 12-week thing? And I think it's something that everyone seems to have an opinion on as well. And so I think there are some people that feel like people shouldn't talk about it before then. And so there's this real kind of stigma, I think, about talking about even early pregnancy. And the reason that people give that is, I didn't want to say anything in case something happened. And just that phrase of itself subconsciously implies the stigma that, don't tell anyone in case it happened, because then you'd have to tell them, which implies that actually baby loss is something that we shouldn't be talking about. And it's just a little phrase that people say all the time, and I guess I must have said it before probably, but I think those are the little things that contribute to the huge stigma that there is around baby loss.
Absolutely. What advice would you give to other mums who are dealing with baby loss? Something similar to what you went through.
I think if I could sum it up in one word, it would maybe be like allow. And I think allowing yourself to do whatever it is that you need to do and to feel whatever it is that you need to feel, whether that's taking as much time off work as you need, or time away from socialising, or even time before you feel ready to try again. But I think a big one, allowing yourself to have whatever feelings you have. And I was I guess maybe shocked by the magnitude of feelings that I did have, and by how long they lasted. And you can end up feeling a lot of kind of secondary emotions about the emotions that you feel, and wondering whether those emotions are valid, whether you should feel that way, and feeling guilty for feeling the way that you do. And actually, it doesn't matter what stage of pregnancy you're at. It doesn't matter if you already have another child. Everything that you feel is valid, and it's okay to allow yourself that, and allow yourself to put the boundaries in place that allow you to do what you need to do. So I think just being really allowing of that experience. I think that would be my advice.
That's really good advice. How did you sort of handle it once you told people? Did you get any sort of uncomfortable questions or comments from people, or how was it?
So I think I'm really lucky. I would say mostly my experience of very gradually being more and more open about it. The response was more and more positive and more supportive. I also realised that, like, when it happened, I felt really alone, and I felt like I didn't know anyone really that had been through it, and yeah, I felt really lonely in that. And it's one of those funny things when you start talking about it. Now I feel like I hardly know someone that hasn't been through it or someone extremely close to them, because it is really really common. So that was very very helpful. So yeah, the more I talked about it, the more support I received. In general, the comments were really really positive. You always get the odd reply maybe that isn't what you hoped. I think because I was lucky enough to have so much support and such positive reaction to me sharing my story openly, particularly in the veterinary space, I I guess maybe that gave me a resilience for the times when it wasn't received so well, or people's comments were maybe a little bit insensitive, because I was aware that that probably reflected something about where they are in their life, and maybe they don't have the understanding or skills or emotional maturity to be comfortable with that level of discomfort, and for that to be okay. So I think it is something I would encourage people to be open if they feel like they're able to, but you also kind of have to be aware that you can't control other people's reactions, and sometimes they might not be what you hope for, but most of the time that's because people don't know what to say, or they don't know a huge amount about it, and they're uncomfortable with kind of other people's discomfort. I think generally we want everyone around
Yeah.
us to be happy and okay, and sometimes some people are really good when other people are distressed, and other people don't know how to handle that, and that's generally more about them and where they're at than you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in a lot of cases, people, because there's not much awareness around it, people possibly just genuinely don't know what to say for the best as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you talk to people about that, I think sometimes people feel it's better not to say anything than to say the wrong thing. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of the time when people actually like don't say something, it comes from a really kind place, because they're really, if they don't know what to say, they're really really worried about it. But generally, just saying anything shows that you're supporting the person and you're acknowledging that. Um, but yeah, I mean, they're difficult conversations, and you don't have to you have to be in a place yourself where you feel resilient enough to be able to have those, and there's no pressure for someone to talk about this kind of stuff if they're not ready to, or they don't want to, and it's not right for them.
Yeah, brilliant. And were you in practice at the time when all this happened?
Yep, yeah, I was in small animal general practice, working yeah, full time as a GP vet.
And how was it in work? Did you feel like you could have the open conversations with your team?
So initially not, because when I returned to work without kind of asking me, the management team had told people that that I'd had my appendix out, and so the way that people responded to me, they obviously didn't know that I'd been through something difficult, and their expectations were that I was better and that I should be bright and jolly. I guess I don't think if I had been asked, I'm not sure I would have known maybe at the time what I wanted them to have said, but I don't know really. I don't know what I would have thought at the time, but that certainly, it was unexpected. And it meant there was this kind of pretense already, and I didn't deal with that very well at all. And so when I went back to work, I probably went back a bit soon. Maybe I should have taken a bit more time off, but I very much wasn't myself, and nobody knew that I'd been through something difficult. So my colleagues around me didn't respond very well, and in the end, I actually ended up having a disciplinary, because people would make complaints about me, because I was normally a very like positive jolly person, and I was obviously quite different, and nobody knew why, and so people complained that I was being very negative and grumpy and difficult to work with. So rather than being met with support, I was met with kind of disciplinary proceedings, which was quite difficult. And at that point, I realised that actually what had gone wrong was that I needed to be open. So I actually sent a blanket, I just sent a message around the entire team and I told them what had happened and I apologised for not being myself. But I think that situation could have been avoided if I'd had slightly better support and I'd maybe been involved in the decision making about like how I wanted it to be handled when I returned to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Vet Minds, tell us a little bit about that.
So Vet Minds is I guess it basically exists as a closed Facebook group, but it's kind of a small organisation, I would guess. So it stands for Miscarriage, Infertility, Neonatal Death and Stillbirth. And it's a closed Facebook group for anyone in the veterinary profession who is facing those sorts of issues. And it started, I shared my story on one of the big veterinary Facebook groups. I think it was Vet Stay Go Diversify. And I just wrote a little bit about my story. And to my knowledge, I think it was one of the first times that someone had sort of done that in the veterinary space. And the response was absolutely amazing. There were hundreds of comments with support and other people sharing their stories. And it just started this conversation that we felt needed to continue, and for that space was so amazing kind of within those comments that we felt that we needed to grow that. So it happened quite organically, kind of almost through the comments, people suggesting that we start a group. So I co-founded that group, and I think now we have nearly 800 members from people in the veterinary profession that have suffered with baby loss or infertility. And it's basically a safe space to share your experience, what you're going through, ask questions, ask for support from people that understand the slightly specific challenges maybe of facing these sorts of things in the veterinary profession, with the work that we do and the types of cases that we deal with. And yeah, it's a really amazing place. So that's kind of the primary objective, and then also we aim to raise awareness and do things like this to just continue that conversation. We're active during Baby Loss Awareness Week in October, and yeah, it's kind of grown from that really. So that's certainly somewhere that I would encourage people to check out if they are facing these sorts of issues and they're looking for some support that exists for veterinary professionals, not just in the UK but across the world.
Amazing, that's brilliant. I was going to ask, is there anywhere that you would suggest people go, if they wanted some support online or in person, when dealing with any sort of fertility struggles? So that's brilliant that there's there that they can go to.
Yeah, and just on that, like the Miscarriage Association is absolutely brilliant, and their website is full of really good resources, particularly obviously for people going through it themselves, but particularly for supporting others. And they've got an amazing section on miscarriage in the workplace with a lot of advice for like managers and on workplace policy and stuff like that, which I think is really helpful to signpost people who might be supporting a colleague or an employee or a friend going through something similar as well.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great. We'll have to get all the links and we can pop it on our blog so people can find all the information in one place. Fab. And then what was it like going through another pregnancy after your loss?
So I always imagined that I would feel really, really anxious having another pregnancy. I didn't actually end up feeling quite as anxious as I thought. So after our loss, because it wasn't planned, we didn't feel that we were in a position to try again, which I think is one of the reasons why I found it so difficult, because I wasn't able to kind of put that to bed and say, okay, well, it doesn't mean that we can't have a child, let's try again. I wasn't able to do that for some time. So I think maybe if I had done, I would have been more anxious, but actually I was just really glad to be somewhere on that that journey, kind of whatever happened, I guess. And it was in lockdown as well, so I think that changed things. But I think one thing I did find quite difficult is it's a kind of a strange space to be, because by that point I was heavily involved with the baby loss community. I found being pregnant quite challenging, because I think I felt I was doing sort of things like this, and I was pregnant and I didn't really know how to handle that, because it was still something that was really important to me. And I know that when I was going through that, I found people being pregnant or people who had babies like really triggering and quite difficult. So I think I found that element of it quite difficult, just managing my own feelings about that and whether I should be feeling guilty, whether I should be feeling happy. So I think that was a tricky thing. And it does put you in this slightly strange place. Pregnancy after loss, you're not quite the same as someone who's another friend who's pregnant who hasn't had a loss, and but you're not kind of in the support camp of the baby loss stuff, because you're kind of in this in between place. So I think I was lucky enough to have a few, because I had been open about it, I was lucky enough to have a few friends that were also in the same position, and we were able to talk about that together. Because if you just have friends who are pregnant and they've not had a loss, you don't want to talk to pregnant people about losses. It's kind of I don't know, it's not really the done thing, is it, to talk about things that can go wrong. So yeah, it's a really tricky time. I think people deal with it differently, but I definitely encourage people to try and find people who understand that kind of specific stage that could offer you some support.
Yeah, brilliant. We're almost out of time already. That 20 minutes has flown by. But just to finish, what would you say? Any words of encouragement or comfort to a mum who's going through a tough time and they're trying to conceive or dealing with a pregnancy loss? Have you got any advice for them?
I guess to answer that as a question of what would I say to another mum who's going through that, I think we've already talked about kind of advice on that sort of stuff. So what I would probably actually say was, I would say how sorry I was, and I would ask them how they were feeling and what I could do to support them, because I think that's probably what people need in that moment.
That's great. Thank you, Nat. Thanks so much. And again, just to close, I just want to say thanks so much for joining us. I know it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to share your story on such a difficult topic. So thank you so much. I'm sure that lots of people listening will really have enjoyed it, and it will have shed a lot of light on an issue that affects so many families. 1 in 4 is so common. So thank you very much for talking to us, and I really hope that the Webinar Vet can do more in the future to help you if you ever need it. Thanks, Nat. Thanks a lot.